Hey guys, how's it going out there? This is the last part of Chapter 4 for History 1530, because we have a test this week. It's due Monday the 21st by 4 p.m. We also have a quiz pending on Chapter 4. This is the fourth and final chapter in the first unit. And I'll conclude this through a rather short YouTube video. At least I hope it's short, and you probably do as well. So make sure you're just keeping up with current events, not for the exam, but just to be educated people from credible sources. So we now have the director of the Center for Disease Control, Robert Redfield, arguing with the president over the efficacy, the effectiveness of masks. Okay, well, you can have your own opinion on that, but please base your opinion on objective facts. Hurricane Sally in the southeast, fires in the Pacific Northwest, coronavirus, tough times, all right? You could say we've always had tough times. Certainly if you were living in New England, Massachusetts specifically, in the late 17th century, those were tough times too. Right? Hopefully we don't resort to things like, I don't know, hanging women because we think they are witches. Okay? This was how the tension in Massachusetts society erupted, so to speak. Right? Both war against native peoples, also the threat of war against France, or La Nouvelle France, like King William's War, but also this internal violence against women for the most part. We'll talk about that in a moment. First, hopefully not too much attention, that you guys can feel well prepared. You're just looking at the content section of Blackboard. Okay, syllabus, there's our book, there are our first two chapters of the book, discussion for video lectures, so there will be one for this, okay, just so you guys are getting credit for attending and participating. Chapter 4 quiz, that's live and available until the 22nd. So the day after the test is the quiz is due. Look, it sounds like a lot, and maybe it is, but if you're preparing for the exam, you're also preparing for Chapter 4 quiz, right? Chapter 4 is on the exam. It's not like studying two different things. So as you prepare, especially for the question on Chapter 4, the exam question on Chapter 4, you should also be preparing for the Chapter 4 quiz, which comes a day later, and then we start a new unit. Yes, beginning with Chapter 5. Right? The exam is up. That's due by 4 o'clock on Monday, September 21st, as I noted. 4 exams over the course of the semester, one per unit. Each unit about 4 chapters in length. Okay? Let me know if there are any problems with this. It's a little different format for me, just as it is for you, teaching via Zoom and YouTube. So let me know how this goes. Let me just reiterate, there is an algorithm that will compare your essay, essays, with other essays, including like Wikipedia and other online sources. So please do your own work, or you will get 0 credit for the exam. Not just for that essay, for the whole exam. All right? And a 0 on one of 4 exams, pretty devastating to the overall grade. Right? So if you run into trouble, don't panic and plagiarize, meaning copy off of your roommate or some other source online. Just let me know what's going on. We'll try to work it out. Okay? All right. Chapter 4. I think where I left off with your Zoom lecture, current slide. That was good to backtrack one. The Empire Strikes. I mean, it's kind of a lame title. Okay, come on, McGear. Right? What the Empire? Couldn't say the Empire Strikes Back because it's the first strike. But the Empire. What empire? Well, the British Empire begins to try to consolidate its rule on its randomly settled colonies. Right? Proprietorships, Virginia Company, religious dissenters. It didn't make sense how these colonies, and by the way, there are more than 13. Good example of that is Barbados, right? Barbados is the wealthiest of them all, based on slave labor sugar production, right? Barbados does not participate in the American Revolution. So there are more than 13 colonies in the Americas held by the British. Soon to be more, like Canada, Quebec, and Ontario, right? So, a couple wars against France and the Native American allies of the French. King William's War, Queen Anne's War. Well, this is all just kind of a precursor to the so-called French and Indian War, which is actually a global struggle known as the 7 Years' War. Although if you count the American stuff, it's 9 years. I know history is sometimes confusing. Just bear with me, all right? Battle for Empire is going to be the British and the Haudenosaunee, meaning Iroquois, or the French and their native allies. A lot of Native Americans sat out this coming war, by the way, right? Who will win? Well, I think you know the answer to that, right? Évidemment, ce n'est pas le français, ce n'est pas la France, parce que nous ne parlons français dans ce pays-ci. Evidently, it's not the French because I'm not speaking French. Well, I was. All right, imperial wars emerged with Indian conflicts. Okay, kind of where we left off. In the midst of this kind of tension between Britain and France, we have social tension within Massachusetts. Puritans, interesting, okay? That first generation is really fundamentalist, right? Very strict interpretation of the Bible. We're pure, England's not, the Catholics are even worse. But the second generation, a little more secular, okay? Third generation, a little more materialistic and profit-minded, okay? Falling away from the rigidity of the early church, right? And look, Puritans believe in God's grace, but they also believe in things like magic and the power of the devil on earth. This is not yet a scientific era. We're coming to that. In fact, in Europe, we do have a few people engaged in science and trying to understand the universe in mathematical, understandable terms, but that has not yet, in a sense, trickled down to the general population. Okay? And it's, frankly, looking at the headlines on the New York Times, it still hasn't, folks. Ooh, sorry. Okay. Well, look, 41% of Americans maybe not believe in science, but I do, and apparently you do too because you're in college. Right? Take some science next semester. Advisements coming up soon. Please start taking. History's awesome. Take history, but take some science as well, so you're well-rounded people and you know things. Liberal arts educated. All right. So tensions within society. There's a lack of a charter. Oh yeah, James II had revoked that charter, so they're kind of operating without any real government. King William's War on the frontier against the French, and scarcity of land, right? There are more and more Puritans. Not that England was generating a lot more, it's just that the Puritans in Massachusetts and beyond, in New England, were having more children who were living longer. Okay? In fact, they sometimes say grandparenthood was invented in New England. People are living long enough to have grandchildren. That had not been the case in Old England, in any large numbers. Okay? So, you have more people, and there's more demand for land, and kind of the rule was you don't get married until you can support, if you're a man, support a wife and children. You can't get married until you have land. Oh, can't get married. Can't get married. People getting older can't get married, okay? So scarcity of land will increase age of marriage. Women who own land were seen as a threat. So a widowed woman, right? A woman who owned land because her husband had died is kind of independent. Doesn't need men. Is on her own. Is dangerous in the minds of the Puritans. And sometimes these women, look, maybe engaged in some folk medicine. Maybe they delivered babies as midwives. They were seen as, frankly, oddballs by general Puritan society. And when things go badly, they're scapegoated. They were seen as the other, the capital O other. There's us and there's them. Right? And then there's the Native Americans who were being pushed away. But within Puritan society, there was like the general God-fearing population, and then there was those women. Those women who have money, who don't need men. Well, who's watching them? Are they doing weird things? Are they flying off in the middle of the night to have sex with the devil and eating babies? What? I'm not making that stuff up, folks. This is what some Puritans believe. So, this will lead to a witchcraft crisis in Salem, Massachusetts, and elsewhere. By the way, something similar is happening in Europe, in England, and in German-speaking parts of Europe. It's difficult to understand the psychology here, but the religious tensions of the age brought about an outlash. Is that even a word? A backlash? Well, I don't know. A violence toward especially women. So, most of the accused were older women. By older, I kind of mean in their 40s and 50s. Most of the accusers were young women. Okay? Most of the accused had some money. In fact, lived in the more prosperous part of the town that was engaging in trade. Most of the accusers were poorer and maybe being left behind by the new market-driven society. A woman or a man who was friendly toward Native Americans was somehow seen as suspicious. Like, those Indians are terrorists. You can't be talking to them or trading with them. Right? You must be a traitor. So, most accused were more prosperous than their accusers. To say that. Here's a map of Salem. You can't see it. I can't even see it. But look, this is how historians can use sources other than just text written. They kind of plotted in Salem, where were the accusers, where were the accused? Oh, different parts of town. The more market-driven part of town, the part of town was prospering through business and trade, is where most people were accused. The accusers came from the part of town that was kind of lagging behind. Was there jealousy involved? Hard to say, but the map kind of makes an argument. Well, what happens? Does your book not say? I'm using I'm kind of using your book as a scaffold here. 19 women are executed. They're put before the court. They're charged with heresy. They're charged with cavorting with the devil, which is a nice way of saying, again, having sex with the devil. Just ridiculous stuff. Using spectral evidence. How do you know this? Well, because a spirit told me. Weirdness, okay? Really hysteria. Psychologists have a field day with these court records. Young girls are getting notoriety, like fame, like, wow, I'm 13 years old and everyone's suddenly paying attention to me. Also, if you were accused of witchcraft, they would promise to let you off with just mild punishment if you named the other witches. Oh, I get off if I name someone else? Okay, you, and you. Goodbye, okay? So there's no rational jurisprudence here, okay? Law based upon hearsay and kind of ghostly evidence. That weird woman looked at my cow, and the next day my cow died. She must have cast a spell on it. She must be a witch. No, actually your cow is old and sick, okay? It's not rational. But women and a couple of men died. By hanging, we will say they were hanged, not hung. That's a different verb. Hanged by death by hanging is to be hanged. So it's okay if you write that in your essay, hanged. Killed a couple dogs. I've had some dogs that I thought were possessed, but I would never harm them, no. More obedience training. A couple of guys got crushed to death. I can't remember the fellow's name, but this is like one of the great lines in history. They lay him on the ground, they put a board on his chest and keep putting rocks on it. And, he can't breathe, his ribs are breaking and stuff. That's awful. But they're saying, tell us that you confess your sins and tell us that you've been, working with the devil. And he's like almost dead and he just goes, oh, I have one thing to say. What does he have to say? More weight. Yeah, all right, good. And they crushed him. Kind of like, screw you. Put another rock on my chest. By the end of the 1600s, the belief that the universe was orderly and that events were caused by natural forces was stronger. We start to see the impact of the scientific revolution, a more rational way of looking at the universe. Your cow died because it was sick. It had been sick for months. It was not the woman next door who made it die. Okay? A more scientific way, frankly, of looking at the universe. There's more education, especially more secular education. We'll see the rise of individualism. People starting to exercise more agency, their own choices, not going along with what the church told them to do. A young girl writhing in hysteria, accusing people of witchcraft. The first person accused was actually an enslaved woman, probably from the Caribbean. Tituba was her name. She was really the other, right? She was single, older, she didn't have any money, she was enslaved, but she was different skin tone. She's the first to be accused. There were not many people of color in Salem, as far as I know. But Tituba was one of the first accused. Actually, the first accused. Empires in collision. Okay, I guess we're on to another subtopic, right, as I'm using the same titles to check with. France attempts an empire. Yeah, I'm standing in it. La Nouvelle France, okay? 1749. A French officer named Céloron de Blainville came through here and put lead plates on big trees. He had a bunch of other soldiers with him. I need to read a little bit more on this. I have not really found much on him. Céloron, right? We have a village named Céloron on the lake. Yeah, Céloron came from Quebec and Montreal through Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, At some point, probably near Westfield, they took their boats, along with their Native American allies, and dragged them over the portage trail from like Westfield and Mayville, put the boats in Chautauqua Lake and explored the lake. Okay? So claiming Chautauqua, spelled with an E, not an A on the end, for the king of Louis XV, Louis XV of France. Why? Well, they're trying to make more alliances with native people and claim this land because the English are coming. The English aren't quite this far west yet, but this land is in contention between the two great superpowers. So, conflict with Britain, French, with fur trade in the interior. Both sides are going to create forts. The French create a major fort in what is now Pittsburgh. It was called Duquesne, okay, the confluence of the rivers there, to try to guard the interior. Remember, there are fewer French. They have to rely on forts, their scattered army, and especially their Native American allies. There are more British people, including folks like George Washington as a young man, at least in the 1750s. Okay? The Americans are British. They're the same, right? I mean, yes, you might have been born in Britain or Virginia, but really you're part of the British Empire. And there are more of them than there are of the French. And fewer native people sided with the British, but the powerful Haudenosaunee, Iroquois, not all of them. By this time there are 6 nations, 6 tribes. Yeah, the Tuscaroras have joined. But not all of them joined the British. Some just said, we're sitting out. We're going to stay out of this one, this impending war. Okay, the French have come all the way down the Great Lakes, to the Ohio, the Chattacoin, the Ohio, the Allegheny, even French Creek, which isn't too far from where I am now, down the Mississippi to La Nouvelle-Orléans. They control the Mississippi. It's going to lead to a major war between France and Britain over inland territory like western Pennsylvania. What about the Spanish? St Augustine, I'm not sure if that's how they pronounce it, it's really Augustine, St Augustine, was to be a military outpost to guard Spanish Florida from the Carolinas, okay, from the colonists in the Carolinas. It actually became a destination for runaway slaves. So if you are an enslaved person, Native American in the Carolinas, or of African origin, and you can escape, run south. The Spanish will free you. Okay? You can live in Spanish Florida as a free person, especially if you want to fight against the British. So there will be free black communities in these borderlands. This is actually an image of Biloxi. This is not of Florida, sorry. That's only one I have. What about the Spanish in New Mexico? There weren't many Spanish in what's now the U.S. Southwest, New Mexico. But they also, the Spanish don't want the French coming into that part of the continent either. They want to convert the Pueblo Indians, many of whom lived in these high mesas, these cliffs actually, cliff dwellings. Many of the Pueblo, at least nominally, at least on the surface, had converted to Catholicism. I'm going to say Spanish Catholicism, which isn't really accurate, but more of a Franciscan interpretation of Catholicism than the French, more Jesuit version of Catholicism. Yes, even in Catholicism, there are different styles. Okay, so the Spanish are in the Southwest, mainly under the Franciscan drive to convert native people. Okay? But the encomienda system, forcing the Pueblo to farm, to labor, part-time, even 3 or 4 days a week. Well, imagine if you just had to, all that you're doing, and suddenly you had to work for someone else 10, 12 hours a day, 3 or 4 days a week. You'd crack, right? We don't have that much spare time. If you do, congratulations. Most of us don't, and take advantage of it while you do, I guess. Right? Popeye, Pueblo Indians are going to revolt against the Spanish and drive them out of the Southwest for a time. So the Spanish will create a color-conscious society in New Mexico. So we will have racial prejudice. The darker one's skin tone, unfortunately the lower one's status in that society. But it's also based on gender. Okay? Men are at the top, especially lighter-skinned men, but most especially if you were born in Spain. If you were born like in Mexico,